Caleb Monroe was a retired prison counselor who had quietly made peace with his past. But one morning, a letter turned his life upside down. Inside the envelope was a newspaper clipping about an old prison fire from 1997. At the bottom, a note in red ink read, "This was no accident." The shadows of Caleb's past had suddenly resurfaced. Back then, the event had been reported as a routine riot, but a detail gnawed at Caleb. The names of certain inmates not on duty that night had been erased from the records. He immediately reached out to his old contacts. Prison archives were encrypted, names replaced with codes, and witness statements removed. Caleb's mind began wrestling with memories long locked away. This wasn't a simple incident, it was a systematic cover-up. During his research, he found traces of Maya Thorne, a young medical officer who served during that time. Maya had disappeared years ago, leaving no trace. However, Caleb discovered through an old union record that she was working under an alias at a legal aid clinic. It took time to reach her. At first, Maya refused to talk. She was afraid. But Caleb's determination eventually won her over. She finally spoke. They drugged them. They called it behavioral rehabilitation, but the inmates were test subjects. Brainwaves were measured, sleep cycles manipulated, and some were kept in isolation for weeks. One night, Maya had hacked into the security system and recorded what was happening in one of the experiment rooms. She gave the footage to Caleb. He was horrified. The video showed an inmate, hands bound, eyes fixed on a screen, while a voice repeatedly whispered words into his mind. Caleb was now certain this was not just a human rights violation, it was a covert mind control experiment. Caleb decided to compile the evidence, but he couldn't act alone. He reached out to his old friend, attorney Alan Pierce. Alan, who understood how the system worked but had remained silent for years, was deeply shaken by the evidence. Together, they launched a covert operation called Threshold Below. Their goal wasn't just to expose the truth, but to find the surviving subjects and give them a voice. With Maya's help, Caleb located one of the former inmates, Darius Kane, one of the first victims of the experiment. Now he lived under a new identity, working a low-profile job. When Caleb approached him, Darius reacted with anger at first. But Caleb didn't want to expose him. He wanted to deliver justice. Slowly, Darius opened up. He spoke of post-experiment nightmares, sudden rage episodes, and lost memories. When Darius's testimony was combined with Caleb's documents, the full picture emerged. The experiment aimed to alter inmate behavior through external brain manipulation. Some died during the process, while others were quietly released and vanished. Caleb and his team compiled all this into the Threshold Below report. It was supported by documents, witness statements, footage, and forensic analysis. But publishing the report wasn't easy. The media was indifferent, and officials were silent. Caleb recognized it as systematic suppression. He'd leaked the report to a newspaper, but the editor-in-chief refused to publish it, citing national security threats. Caleb didn't give up. Alan's young student, Lara Sims, reached out to independent journalists via social media. The report was published anonymously online. Within days, it was shared by thousands. Threshold Below had become a movement. Caleb's mission had expanded. He was no longer just exposing the past shadows, but breaking today's silence. But the system didn't remain idle. Caleb realized he was being watched. His phones were tapped, his steps followed. One night, His home was mysteriously set on fire. Authorities tried to dismiss it as a simple fire, but Caleb was prepared. Digital backups of the files were uploaded to multiple servers. The movement grew even stronger. Victims' families began speaking out. Former staff reached out to Caleb to ease their consciences. Maya's footage became part of a documentary. Caleb's name had become a symbol of hope for justice seekers, but the main target remained Martin Huxley, a high-ranking government official who had funded the experiment. For years, Huxley had been portrayed as a hero in the media, the face of reform. But Caleb was ready to unmask him. The final move came at a fundraising event where Caleb had arranged for audio recordings to be played. The event was broadcast live. The recordings captured Huxley discussing the experiments and referring to the inmates as expendable subjects. The broadcast was cut short, but it was too late. The truth of the threshold below could no longer be hidden. Caleb Monroe, once a silent counselor, had become the loudest voice for justice. And that day, the weight of the past finally lightened. Caleb Monroe, now the leader of the Threshold Below movement, had become a global figure. Documentaries, articles, and public pressure eventually led to Martin Huxley's official dismissal. But for Caleb, the real battle had just begun. Huxley had been removed from office but hadn't faced justice. Caleb was invited by the UN Human Rights Commission to speak in Geneva. There he revealed that similar experiments were being conducted not just in the US, but in allied countries as well. It became a global ethical scandal. Following Caleb's presentation, multiple countries launched investigations. For Caleb, this wasn't a victory, it was a responsibility. With Felix's help, he expanded the identity tracking network globally. Laura Sims became the media spokesperson for the system. Maya, now fully recovered from her trauma, joined Caleb in fieldwork to reach new victims. What hurt Caleb the most was still not finding some of the inmates he had once counseled. Finding them became his final mission. Caleb continued his search and eventually discovered the trail of Jonah Creed, listed as dead in the 1997 fire, but actually taken into the experiment. Jonah, traumatized, lived a reclusive life in a mountain village. It was hard to talk to him, but Caleb promised to give him not only his past, but the truth. After weeks of conversation, Jonah began to open up. What he revealed exposed a new layer of the experiment. Jonah explained that it wasn't just about individuals. The experiments aimed to test societal reflexes, controlled crisis scenarios, provoked group conflicts, psychological test zones. Caleb recorded Jonah's testimony and created a new dossier titled Threshold Below, the Final File. This document didn't just outline past abuses, it defined future ethical boundaries. The world was forced to confront the truth. A special UN session was held. In his speech, Caleb Monroe said, "Justice isn't always found in courtrooms. Sometimes it echoes in the mountains, in minds, in silence." And that day, the world was shaken by a counselor's whisper. After completing his final mission, Caleb withdrew from public life. With Maya, he established a small rehabilitation center in the countryside. The center, named the True Identity Foundation, provided support and therapy for experiment victims. Laura Sims returned to journalism, but mentioned Caleb's name with reverence in every interview. Caleb Monroe was no longer just a name in the archives. He had become a symbol in the conscience of humanity. Because this story, which began in silence, had awakened the world with its echo. What about you? If you had once been part of the silence, would you carry the burden of staying quiet? Or fight back, like Caleb Monroe, even if it was too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe justice is only found in courtrooms or in memories, streets, and the quiet corners of conscience? Maybe your words could give someone else the strength to speak. Because sometimes one whisper is all it takes to wake the world.